When you hear the word courage, a lot of people think of like firefighter running into a burning building. Yes, that is one form of courage. We're talking about like showing up as your authentic self. That takes
Mhm.
a whole heck of a lot of courage.
Welcome to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. I'm Kristen Fields Chadwick, your podcast coach on this transformative podcasting journey. Our mission: empower Kingdom entrepreneurs to confidently launch and grow podcasts, fostering a journey of being seen, being heard, being known, and making a lasting kingdom impact. This is Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. Your voice matters. What is up, y'all? Okay, we are on step number 9 of our 10-part series on how to start a podcast. And I want to hear from you. If you have walked through every step with us in each episode since the beginning of summer, and you have launched your podcast, will you please reach out to me on Instagram? I would love to hear from you, and I would love to hear how this whole process is going for you. If you have been following along and you're just kind of curious how I did the 10 steps and you haven't really quite taken action, I encourage you to book a call with me, because we can, in 15 minutes, map out how you want to move forward with launching your podcast. Now, if for some reason you are listening to this and you have already listened or you have already launched your podcast, well done. You're continuing to master your craft, which is what we're going to be talking about today, all about mastering your craft. And if that is you and you have already launched a podcast and you're continuing to grow your podcast, you're going to want to stay tuned in the next couple of weeks, because we are going to be really heading right into how specifically can we grow your podcast. So stay tuned. And if you know a new podcaster who is thinking about launching a podcast, would you do me a fave, a solid, I'm trying to think of what my teenage daughter would call it. I don't know. I think it's a solid. Anyway, would you share this podcast with someone who is wanting to start a podcast? I would so appreciate it. And even better, after they listen to the podcast, encourage them to reach out to me. I'm not scary. I am on your team. If it is not a right fit for us to work together, I will point you to somebody who can help you exactly where you're at. Okay, so here we are. Step 9, we are talking about mastering your craft. We talked about last week, we talked about deciding, all right, how do I decide moving forward what I want to do with my podcast? Do I want to edit myself, or do I want to hand it all off to a production team like our team? Or do you want to be somewhere in the middle where you're fine with somebody else editing it, but you enjoy writing the show notes? So that was last week's episode. I encourage you to go back and listen to that if you're still trying to decide whether you want to hire a podcast manager or a podcast producer or a VA to help you. It will help you decide on that next step. So today we are going to be talking about the last of the 2 steps. Like I said, these go hand in hand. So the Lord, at the very beginning of the winter, maybe late fall, He dropped 2 words into my heart, which was master and cultivate. And those 2 words have meant so much to me over these last, 8 or 9 months. And I thought it's a great way to round out these last 2 steps in our 10-step process here. And today on this episode, we're going to really talk about how you can master your podcasting craft. And it's really important. This is how you grow your show. If you are good at what you do, if you create solid, creative content, like my good buddy Dave Jackson says, who is like my podcasting hero. He just did a couple of episodes this summer talking about how every podcast should have a wow factor. It should educate, entertain. It should make you think. It should make you laugh. Oh man, there's just so many aspects to growing your show purely off of the content. Now, what I mean by that is if you think about the last thing that you shared with somebody, it hit one of those things. It was either informational, educational, entertainment, or it was funny and entertaining, like I said, right? So I want you to think about that. What was the last thing that you shared? Was it well done? Did it take a lot of time and effort for that person to put into their production, whether it be a TV show or a podcast? Most things that we share, we know that that person has mastered their craft. Master or mastery, it means in the Merriam Dictionary, which shout out to my maiden name. My maiden name is Merriam. And so I always go to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Mastery means skill or knowledge that makes one master of something. So let's take this into consideration. As you have started your podcast, you've pressed record, you've released a few episodes. Practicing. No one expects a 4-year-old who says, I want to be a gymnastics, or I want to be an Olympic gymnastics girl, right? Nobody expects her to go out onto that floor and do a back handspring into a back tuck and do the pull, to do the not pole vault to do the vault or to do the bars. That's just not how it works. And that's how it works with podcasting, is that you show up and you practice and you practice and you practice and you practice. I'm just thinking about right now as I'm recording this, it has been a few months since I've recorded my last episode because I did a lot of batch recording, which we'll talk about. And I did a lot of batch recording in May to where I could enjoy my summer. I didn't have to come up with a creative idea. I just needed a good solid break from recording. But I did that on purpose so that my show would consistently come out, right? And now that I've taken this break, I'm a little rusty, you guys. I have pressed restart and erase and redo. I think this is my 7th time of starting. So there's been lots of funny little bloopers that I might have to put in, maybe just now I was going rusty dusty. That was me, because I am rusty. It takes practice and consistency to show up using my voice, probably a little bit more than a lot of people, because I'm not used to just getting my words out of my mouth. They usually just like to hibernate inside my brain, and it takes a lot of effort for me to get it out of my mouth and spoken. So if you resonate with that, I hear you, girl. You are not alone in that. And I'm telling you that practice, it's going to make it easier and easier. So just like that example of a 4-year-old girl who says, I want to be an Olympic gymnast. Yes. You know what it takes? Hours and hours and hours, and finances and commitment and follow through and determination and motivation and God's strength and God's will. All of those things, that's what it takes to attain your goal as a podcaster. Another example would be if you think about somebody who wants to run a marathon, right? If they were not a marathon or not a runner, they're not just going to go put on some tennis shoes that they have in their closet and then run 26.2 miles. Maybe you would, but you might hurt yourself, right? So if you think about as you're starting your podcast, there's a process of this growth. You're going through this training phase where you're going to learn what quote unquote type of shoes you like to wear. Do you like minimalist shoes? Do you like really chunky New Balance type of shoes? Which one is best for your body? You learn your strengths, you learn your weaknesses, you accommodate and you adjust your goals as you go. So just like that marathon runner in that example. It's the time and the commitment and the tweaking and the getting used to and the soreness and having to adjust to different rhythms of seasons outside, or as this analogy continues to go side by side with podcasting, you're going to have to adjust. What is best for you? What is the best thing for you to accommodate? I mean, I'm how many years in? 8 years into podcasting, and I'm still adjusting like what works for me in this season. So as we master our craft, we're really mastering our self-awareness and the awareness of what's resonating with our audience, and also practicing. Malcolm Gladwell, I'm sure most of you guys know who that is. He wrote a book called Outliers, and he is the one that really coined the concept of 10,000 hour rule of mastery. So it takes 10,000 hours to truly master a skill. And it's the same for you as you are podcasting and you are showing up, you're learning, and it's the same for your business. It's the same for your ministry. It's choosing to show up every day, even on the days that you aren't motivated. And that reminds me of one of our podcast members inside of our membership. She just did an Instagram story, which was so good. She was talking about her fitness journey and how she was choosing to show up at the gym even when she didn't really want to. And that's it, my friend. You're going to have days in your podcasting where you don't want to show up to the mic. You're going to have ups and downs of downloads. You're going to have episodes that you record that you feel like, I knocked that out of the park. And then you're going to have episodes that you may want to delete, and it's all a part of the journey. You're going to have those episodes that are like vulnerability hangovers, where you want to go crawl in a hole and you're like, oh gosh, did I really just share that? But then you'll hear from people that are like, I'm so glad that you shared that. And so with all of that, it's part of this growth process and journey as a podcaster. And I tell all of my podcast launch clients that you have to understand that starting a podcast is not going to be instant success. It's a process. It's a slow burn. You're in it for the long haul. I've even said in previous podcast boot camps where I've launched a group of podcasters through, and I've said, this is kind of like a commitment, like marriage commitment. I mean, not marriage, but you know what I mean? Like you are committing to walk through all seasons of the year with your podcast and stick with it for at least a certain amount of time. And I'm going to tell you what this magic number is, because I think it's really important at the end. There's a certain amount of time that I want my new podcasters to really commit. And then there's another time frame where you're really going to see some traction and really see a committed group of followers of your podcast, which in turn, most likely, if you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur, is going to mean income, and it's going to mean you are creating kingdom impact at another time point. And I'll share that at the end of the episode. But right now, I just want to give you some tips and tools to help you create this 10,000 hours of mastery in your podcasting craft. And you're going to have to find support. Not only, we talked about how last week, delegating some things off of your plate, if you can financially, that is an option that you can do. And it's really helpful. It's really helpful to have an editor, to have another set of eyes, to have somebody write your show notes if that's not your expertise. I have clients that are everywhere from they just press record and we do promotion and YouTube and Reels. And then we have clients that love the part of the process except for editing. So she writes her own show notes. She loves to create the post, all of those things. So you can find support in that way. When I first started podcasting, I was doing pretty much everything on my own, and my sweet husband was editing my stuff. And every week I really was barely hanging on. And there were multiple factors to that. I think the biggest thing for me was the creation process. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have accountability. I didn't have somebody else helping coach me through this process. I was constantly asking like, well, what episode should I create next? How do I know if this is resonating? I was super overwhelmed, not only by this creative process and wanting to create excellent episodes, but I was alone in it. And I also was either my husband was editing or I was editing. I was also writing my show notes. I was creating the posts. I was trying to create a Facebook group. And again, I felt very alone and kind of lost on where to throw the spaghetti, right? I didn't know what was working. I didn't know where to put my time and my effort. And I don't want you to live like that. If you have launched your podcast and you're in this place of like, well, now what? So here's a couple of options that I want to throw your way, which is number one, hitting on this mastering your craft, is finding a podcast community to help you master your craft. So what do I mean by that? I mean, find other podcasters who are great at podcasting. Who do you enjoy listening to? And I want you to just think about, why do you enjoy listening to them? What is it about them? For example, I love listening to Ed Milet. If you don't know who that is, he is a Christian man, but his podcast is very faith driven, but it's not obvious, if that makes sense. He has a heart to love every single one of his guests so deeply. In the interview questions, it shows up that way. So for me, one way that I have found to help me master my craft is I notice how podcasters are interviewing, or if Dave Jackson is another one. I love the way that Dave Jackson does his audio in the School of Podcasting. I think it's very fun and brings humor in, and I really enjoy that. So I take some nuggets from him. Another place where I master my craft, because I am a podcast coach, is the Feed podcast with Rob and Elsie Escobar, who Rob Walsh with Libsyn and Elsie Escobar with Libsyn. And every other week they put out content that helps me as a podcaster show up as a great podcaster and as a podcast coach who is educating myself and mastering my craft. That is hours of continued effort and practice and learning and educating and continuing to get better and better and better. Another way too that's free is Facebook groups. I know when I first started, one of the best ways that I had accountability was through Facebook groups. You got to be brave, and you got to offer, like, put a post out there saying, hey, I'm looking for accountability, or I'm looking for a brainstorming session, or whatever. Whatever you need, go and find a group and put yourself out there. There is a podcast group called Christian Podcasters. It's really great. There's She Podcast. I really enjoy them. Stephanie Gass, she's another podcast coach that is wonderful. She's a solid believer. And she has a Facebook group, even though she's not a big social media girl. But she has a whole team running that Facebook group, and there's always lots of great encouragement in there. So I encourage you to listen to her. And then, of course, you guys, mine. So if you go on Facebook, you can be a part of our Facebook group for podcasters. It's called Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs, just like this podcast. And you can come in and we have posts where we share our podcast, or we do review swaps, or I would love for you guys to collaborate with one another. It's a great opportunity to just get plugged in with some other podcasters. And then the last one I'm going to recommend is my good friend Misty Phillips. She runs Spark Media, and she has another beautiful Facebook group for podcasters for Christian women. So and men. So check those out. I'll leave all of those in the show notes below so you can check those out with one little easy click. All right. So then next, finding a podcast community that's going to help you master your craft is through investing in education. Now, what I mean by that is find somewhere like my podcast membership, where if you're anything like me, you have to throw some skin in the game and you need to invest in a group to make yourself show up and to focus on what you need to focus on. You have taken a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy to create this podcast, right? So you want to continue to have like life blood poured into you as you are continuing to grow over this next year. Now, like I said, I do have a podcast membership. It is a monthly membership. You can pop in and out anytime. I think one of the most important times of any podcaster's life podcast expectancy, it would be, maybe that's a wrong word. You guys, my brain is a little rusty. So I would say the most important time in a podcaster's growth is within this first few months and after about a year and a half, and you're feeling a little bit like, okay, what am I doing? So those are some sweet spots that ideal time to invest in a podcast membership. And you can try mine. My podcast membership is awesome. I personally think we have some of the greatest podcasters inside of our group. Right now it's very small. It's about 13 different podcasters who come every week. Not every week, but every month we have options for group coaching. And we do that about twice a month. And then we also have a pod class in this membership where once a month I bring in an outside expert and they come and they speak on something specific that we can grow as a podcaster. So that is mine. There are plenty of options. Like I said, Misty Phillips, she has Spark Media. She has a membership. There is a membership from Jennifer Hensel, Women in Podcasting, which is another great one. If you don't want a Faith Forward podcast membership, that's another one. So I just want you to hear that ways to master your craft. It's when you're in community with other like-minded podcasters. It spurs you on to try new things. It encourages you to keep going. And you're also not only investing in this membership for yourself to educate and to grow as a podcaster and to grow your podcast, but you're also connecting with people and networking with people so that when they're networking too, they can think of you. And even just in my own podcast membership and other memberships that I've been a part of, the collaborations are worth it in itself, because not only are you supporting one another, which is how we're created to do things anyways, to come alongside other people, but you're also creating this community of support for one another. And there's just really nothing like it. So be sure to check that out. I'm going to have all the links in the show notes below. If you're interested in my podcast membership, I can point you to another membership if you don't want the Faith Forward. But please, please, please invest in a podcast membership to be around other podcasters. The last thing too, within finding a podcast community is find a conference. Look to see what is going to be in your area, or maybe you want to go on a trip. Last year, I went to Spark Media Conference in Houston, Texas, and it was by far one of the best things that I did as a podcast coach and as a podcaster, to just be encouraged that we're all in this together. But, podcasting can feel pretty lonely, and we can do a lot of Zoom calls, but there's nothing like meeting other podcasters in real life. and supporting one another and seeing each other and hearing their hearts and hearing who they are delivering a message to, and so that you can refer them to other people as well. Okay. So next on establishing and mastering your craft would be to set some goals and, again, have that accountability there. Do you have a podcast coach? Do you have a membership where you can have that accountability? And asking yourself this question, what does success look like in your podcast? I want you to go back through this series, and in step 1, 2, and 3, I want you to redo those over and over again. This is part of what I do inside of my membership is we get really clear every quarter. We do a reevaluation on our who, our why, and how. And those are really important questions as a podcaster, because you're going to shift. You're going to shift your person. You're going to see what is resonating with people and what's not resonating with people. You're going to see different seasons require different messaging. So it's really important that you continue to go back to your why, your mission, your how, and your who. Again, another example would be to find somebody inside of your free Facebook groups or the membership and just have each other as accountability. When I had my first podcast with Holistic Hearts, I joined a Facebook group. Actually, it was Stephanie Gass's Facebook group, and a group of us women, we at the time couldn't afford to do her class. And so we were like, you know what, let's just show up for each other. Every week we're going to get together and just ask each other how it's going. And you guys, it was so sweet. It was such a good time to hear how other people were doing their podcast and growing their businesses as well. And then we ended up supporting each other through some pretty big life moments. And it was just a beautiful connection. So I encourage you to do that. Find your accountability person, whether it's in a free Facebook group or inside of our Facebook group or the podcast membership. Okay. And then number 3, I want you to, as you're going through this beginner year, I want you to reflect on what's working and what's not working for you. So for instance, does batch recording work for you? Try it out. See if it works. Is it a seasonal thing? Is it reflection on, okay, I really enjoy interviews. I have somebody who is a part of our membership that just started doing interviews, and she has lit up with joy talking about how much she has enjoyed interviews. And so reflecting on that, okay, I really do well with interacting with other people. Or do you love just riffing instead of having bullet points? Or do you like to write it all out? Or do you like to do weekly releases? Do you like to do bi-weekly releases? What's working for you? It's all about reflection in this first year. I think one of the biggest things that I was aware of during my first year of podcasting was how much I needed my husband to pep me up to just be brave and to share. And that is awareness. So what is it for you? If you're 3 months in, 6 months in, you have an opportunity to look back and see, okay, this worked for me. This didn't work for me. It worked for me to actually not have to batch record and just do it weekly. It worked for me to have to do a time crunch. Maybe you have more of that ADHD brain where you're like, okay, it's time. It's go time. That means I'm on point at this moment. So again, realizing what works for you and what doesn't work for you and in what season. And these are all the things that you're going to be observing as you are walking out this first year. So another example would be a client who, one of our podcast management clients who realized after launching and then went radio silent for a long time. I won't tell you how long, but a long time. She put a lot of effort into launching her episode. And then after months of not releasing an episode, she ended up deciding to hire a production team because she was overwhelmed. She didn't want to move forward because it felt so overwhelming. And it was stopping her from recording and releasing any episodes. So again, just be mindful and master your craft of podcasting. What's working for you? And mastering your craft really means taking those intentional steps to focus on your podcast skill set. And I want to mention, because I had referred to this at the beginning or mid of our episode, that I would answer your questions about how long does it take to really start to gain momentum in your podcast? And then also, when do you start seeing success? And I will tell you that after being in this industry since 2016, I can tell you that podcasting is a little bit like a good smoked barbecue, where it's been hours of smoking and simmering and lingering, and the longer the better, right? You get the tastiest meat when you let it soak and simmer and just do its thing. It's breaking down enzymes. And you also need the right ingredients, right? So you wouldn't throw in a brisket and put, I don't know, what would be gross? Chocolate. Well, actually, I don't know. Some people might put chocolate in there, but I'm thinking random spices that don't mix well together. You need the proper ingredients to bring this amazing brisket to the table. And it takes time, and that's okay. It's a process. You're going to grow, and you're going to have these incredibly high moments where you're like, yes, this is actually working. And I'm so stinking excited, as you should be. And then there are going to be days when, to be honest, you're going to say, should I even be doing this podcast anymore? And I'm here to tell you, as somebody who has walked through this a lot, that God has called you to use your voice. I want you to keep showing up. Keep asking him, what's that next step? And friend, you are not alone. Part of mastering your craft is knowing you are not alone in this process. And Holy Spirit's going to lead you, but you have to trust the growth process. And for most podcasters, the answer to that question of how long does it take to really start seeing traction, it's 18 months. And you're going to start to see some of your quote unquote true fans start to surface. And hopefully it's before then, but I'm giving you that 18 months because when your podcast, say you launch a podcast in January, you're walking with your podcast, your people, your message for an entire year, which means you're walking through all the seasons. You're walking through the wintry blues. You're walking through the April and May crazy mom life. And then you're walking through summer and relaxation. And then you're walking through the back to school. And then you're walking through the holidays. That is a whole slew of different content for your ideal listener. So now you're back to January again. Now you're getting feedback. Okay, last January I started here on my downloads, or this was the feedback from my listeners, and I can compare it to last January. February, same thing. How was last February? Checking with those download numbers. What could I do differently? What resonated with people last year? And continuing on. So 18 months is really where you get to fall into a beautiful rhythm with your podcast. You've got a lot of data and you've tried things, and now you're getting into rhythm. Now, where you start to see true success is about 3 years. And that is statistically what has been said. And I'm quoting Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, that 3 years really is where we start to see success. Now, going back to what I said earlier, what is your definition of success? It may be way before then. So, friend, all that to say, you've got to get some grit. You have to expect a long haul. And this is relationship building. You are cultivating and tending to and watching something that you have grown, or, you've tossed your seed in, and you're watching it grow. And it's going to take time. It is going to take time. So next week, speaking of throwing seed into the sand, hopefully you don't throw your seed into the sand. Throwing your seed into amazing soil. I speak that over you. You are throwing seed into amazing soil. That is your podcast. That is your voice. That is you offering out what God has given you to share and putting it into the soil. And right now, as we move into step 10 next week, we're going to be talking about cultivating. So how do we nourish? How do we support? How do we protect? How do we encourage growth out of this seed? And that's what we're going to be talking about next week, is cultivating. So here's your call to action after this episode here, is I want you to find me on Instagram, and I want you to send me a message. Tell me what is one step that you're going to do to help you master your podcasting craft this next week or month. I want to hear from you. What is it going to be? And as always, if after listening to the series, you are needing help with launching your podcast, if you're stuck on step 3 and 4 and you can't quite get past the launch process, guys, hit me up. I'd love to walk you through that. I can help you with that. And if you don't know how to grow your podcast, I can help you with that too. And if you need somebody to take over your podcast production, whether that's editing or you want the whole shebang, kit and caboodle, my team and I are happy to help with that too. The best way to start that process of any of those 3 things is to set up a free 15-minute call with me to help you decide what's the best next step for you and your podcast. All right. Take care, and I will speak with you next week on step 10. Thanks for listening today. Hey, I want you to know that there is an opportunity for you and I to connect. I would love to do that. Find a link below and we can schedule a one-on-one free 15-minute consultation. I want to hear, where are you in your podcasting journey, and how can I help serve you and help you bring that kingdom impact dream into reality?